Chapter 1, Where Giants First Rose. Long before towering temples and elaborate city walls defined Mesopotamia, a narrow belt of land offered refuge from the desolate stretches of desert on either side. Enclosed by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, this region boasted silt-rich soil that turned seeds into near miracles of productivity. It was here that humanity first truly learned to harness the bounty of nature, leaving a profound imprint on every civilization that followed. The Tigris and Euphrates could be both generous and merciless. Seasonal flooding replenished fields with nutrient-rich silt, yet occasionally washed away homes, flocks, and grain stores. Early inhabitants had no choice but to observe the rivers with a mix of reverence and apprehension, intently studying their rhythms to anticipate the best times for planting and harvesting. For untold centuries, roving bands had subsisted through hunting and foraging, moving seasonally wherever game was plentiful. But this rare cradle of arable land coaxed them to linger. Over time, they transformed from restless wanderers into dedicated planters, sowing seeds with a sense of hope that the swollen rivers would not betray them. Converting wild grasses into domesticated cereals was never an overnight process. The earliest farmers painstakingly selected seeds that yielded stronger stalks or tastier grains, often discovering new planting methods along the way. Each season taught a hard-earned lesson about channeling river waters efficiently, protecting seeds from pests, and preserving a precious surplus for drier times. As harvests grew more predictable, people found reasons to settle, and to settle together. The simple notion of collectively storing and defending grain gave rise to the seeds of society. Once the labor of farming was divided among many, an individual no longer needed to handle everything alone. Such specialization of tasks, digging channels, shaping bricks, tending flocks, signaled the dawning of collaborative existence. In this land with scarce timber and abundant clay, sun-baked bricks became the simplest yet most enduring building material. Early families molded clay mixed with straw into bricks and laid them to create sturdy walls. Though their homes seemed modest compared to future ziggurats, they represented an incredible leap toward permanent shelter, signaling a major break from roving camps. The once fluid lifestyle of hunter-gatherers softened into the rhythms of sowing, weeding, and threshing. People now gathered in kin-based hamlets or loose tribal confederacies near the rivers, seeking safety in numbers. With cooperation came the need for shared customs, rules, and rudimentary leadership, enabling them to overcome common threats like flooding or rogue predators. Although the soil was unparalleled in its richness, the climate's extremes tested every settlement. Rainfall was meager, and temperatures soared. Overcoming unrelenting sun and parched air required that even the smallest community dig water channels and basins to ensure survival. Seasonal dryness forced them to store both grain and water with meticulous care, forging habits that would echo down the millennia. As each group found ways to endure, they forged a nascent identity distinct from nomadic cousins still roaming the steppe. People described themselves by which patch of riverside farmland they tilled or which winding channel they depended upon. This sense of place, tied to a stretch of land along a river, laid the foundation for the powerful city-states that would eventually rise across southern Mesopotamia. Flocks of sheep and goats soon thrived on the stubbly grasses near these settlements. Gradually, domestication expanded, from hardy sheep and goats, to cattle that eased the burden of plowing, to poultry that provided eggs and occasional meat. This availability of reliable food resources further cemented their permanent lifestyle and allowed populations to grow. Within just a few generations, the once silent banks of the Tigris and Euphrates turned into a patchwork of cultivated fields and pastoral meadows. Cook fires at dusk cast shadows on mud walls, and the aroma of barley stew wafted through the evening air. Music, perhaps a reed flute or a simple drum, began punctuating daily tasks, drawing villagers closer through shared celebrations. Even at this early stage, reverence for unseen powers flourished. The rivers, personified as mighty spirits, were venerated and appeased with offerings to moderate their annual rampage. Some believe the first shrines took shape as humble huts where villagers prayed for the harvest, fertility, and safe floods. These rudimentary places of worship would evolve into the towering temples we associate with classical Sumer. With more people, bigger harvests, and budding religious rituals, small clusters of huts gravitated into something resembling proto-towns. Communal storehouses for grain became essential, guarded by village chiefs who started to emerge as figures of authority. Local crafts flourished, pottery from the nearby clay, woven woolen garments from domesticated sheep, laying the groundwork for the economy of tomorrow. Greater yields inspired more ambitious projects. Instead of each group building its own canal haphazardly, neighbors coordinated efforts to maximize irrigation. Networks of ditches soon integrated multiple villages, a marvel of the time. This new synergy encouraged trade. Surplus grains could be bartered for stone, metal, or timber brought by travelers from distant highlands. In this environment of evolving customs, increasing harvests, and shared challenges, the raw outline of a pioneering civilization began to emerge. The story of Sumer would soon unfold, birthing a cultural tapestry rich in mythology, governance, and unparalleled innovation. These earliest endeavors, humble though they were, foreshadowed a new era in human history, as the first steps on the path to giant metropolises, mighty kings, and written records were planted firmly along those life-giving waterways. Chapter 2: The Dawn of Organized Living. Settling near the rivers brought about more than just security. It inspired an age of purposeful collaboration. Communities no longer existed in isolation, but began coordinating on a scale previously unseen. Simple ditches turned into extensive irrigation systems that had to be planned, dug, and maintained regularly. This sense of collective responsibility bound people together in profound ways. With each flood season, settlers refined their approach to channeling water. Where once a single family might push a shallow canal to the edge of its field, now entire villages worked in unison to engineer larger, interconnected networks. Such cooperative endeavors demanded individuals who could organize labor forces, create schedules, and negotiate boundaries. Leadership emerged not from brute force but from the ability to orchestrate group efforts. In place of transient huts that could be quickly packed up, sturdier homes rose, reflecting a newfound confidence in permanence. Some were clustered around common storehouses, while others developed close to small sanctuaries. Mud-brick walls ensured that families stayed dry during the rainy season and sheltered from the scorching sun in summer. With each improvement, villagers grew more firmly rooted, both physically and spiritually. In these growing settlements, people began to specialize. Potters crafted vessels that helped manage water, while weavers transformed wool into robust textiles. Skilled laborers discovered how to strengthen tools by experimenting with stone or bone. Instead of each household doing a little bit of everything, skilled experts now honed their craft, contributing uniquely to the wider community's prosperity. Alongside these practical activities, the seeds of governance took root. At first, the authority of elders, often those who understood the rivers best, was enough to settle disputes or manage festival preparations. But as canal networks expanded and granaries overflowed, communities needed a more coherent system to record transactions, resolve conflicts, and distribute surplus. This embryonic bureaucracy signaled an organized future. Irrigation itself had become a shared ritual. At dawn, workers opened or closed wooden gates to direct the flow of water, guided by knowledge passed down through generations. Slowly, tasks were divided up. Some oversaw digging, others reinforced the canal banks, and a few took careful tally of how much water each field received. This precise management forged new bonds of trust. Everyone depended on everyone else's honesty and effort. Where once music was reserved for evenings around the hearth, rhythmic chants now accompanied the dredging of canals and the stacking of bricks. These communal labor events sometimes turned into day-long affairs, with laughter, feasting, and friendly competition. Despite the intense physical demands, The shared purpose of keeping their fields fertile made the burden feel lighter. Harvest days also transformed into collective celebrations. When the barley ripened, entire families joined together to gather it, carrying the cut stalks to threshing floors. Singing eased the work, while older children learned agricultural secrets from elders. By the time dusk settled, the air filled with the sweet scent of fresh grain, marking another year of life sustained and proof of what unity could achieve. Emblems and tokens began appearing to mark ownership of these precious surpluses. Clay counters were molded to represent measures of grain or livestock, and sealed inside clay envelopes for safekeeping. While still rudimentary, these tokens foreshadowed a mighty leap toward written communication. Managing the settlement's resources now required record-keeping, a milestone that allowed human memory to endure beyond a single generation. Coordinating trade was another evolving aspect of organized living. Villages had learned to cultivate cereals, but lacked certain essential goods. In distant mountains, hunters gathered stone ideal for shaping tools, or metals that could be smelted into sharper blades. With the harvest secured, caravans followed dusty tracks to barter grain, wool, and dried fish for the sought-after items they could not produce at home. Temple precincts, initially little more than open-air altars, grew in scale as more settlers came to worship. People believed these sacred places blessed their waterworks and farmland, ensuring the cosmic order stayed balanced. Religious leaders, once merely symbolic figures, became indispensable in guiding spiritual rites. Over time, they accrued both moral authority and considerable influence over the settlement's day-to-day affairs. A blossoming culture of festival and sport took shape, reflecting a new rhythm of life. With enough surplus to feed everyone, villagers organized foot races, wrestling matches, and music competitions. These gatherings made each settlement more than just a place to eat and sleep. They became centers of connection, creativity, and camaraderie. In response to occasional disputes over canal use, fresh systems of mediation took hold. Councils of respected individuals heard grievances and clarified boundaries, aiming to prevent damaging rivalries. Although the older generation sometimes grumbled at the changes, most welcomed the relative peace these fledgling forms of justice provided. As the cycle of sowing, watering, and reaping repeated year after year, each settlement's identity solidified. At the heart of each was a sense of shared destiny, of belonging to a land that required watchful guardianship. Families taught their children, if we do not care for the earth, we cannot thrive, passing on not just a skill, but a worldview centered on harmony with the rivers. By the close of this transformative era, the lines of distinction between nomad and settler were firmly drawn. In the footprints of these organized villages, the future glimmered cities of stone and clay yet to be built, bureaucracies yet to be formalized, kings yet to be crowned. It was a dawn defined by purposeful cooperation and the conviction that through unity, an otherwise harsh land could be made into a home of abundance. Chapter 3: Uruk and the Birth of the City-State. Uruk rose from the plains like no settlement before it, a place where simple mud-brick homes gave way to increasingly sophisticated structures that stretched toward the sky. All around its growing heart, people flocked from smaller villages, drawn by rumors of abundant harvests, robust walls, and leaders who seemed to wield unparalleled authority. In a region used to modest hamlets, Uruk's burgeoning skyline hinted at a shift in human ambition itself. Visitors entering the city were greeted by the sight of wide avenues lined with trading stalls. Pots, textiles, and dried fish jostled for space with donkey-led caravans carrying wood and stone from distant lands. Market gatherings blended the hum of conversation with the clink of copper tools, as deals were struck and alliances formed. Here, the notion of a self-contained community, a city-state, took form, large enough to claim autonomy, yet intimate enough to be governed from within. The focal point was the raised platform where workers toiled endlessly to build and rebuild a temple dedicated to the city's tutelary deity. While only slightly elevated at first, Each renovation added another layer of mud bricks until it towered over neighboring structures. No one could miss its symbolic importance. The city's fate, many believed, hinged on the god's favor, and the temple promised the divine protection that every citizen craved. Stepping inside, one encountered grand courtyards and dedicated chambers set aside for priests. Incense drifted in the humid air, carrying prayers skyward. Sacred objects crafted by skilled artisans bore testament to both piety and wealth. Even those suspicious of priestly influence found it hard not to be awed by the temple's ambience of heightened spirituality, where every footstep echoed with reverence. Beyond religious rites, Uruk pulsed with cultural energy that surpassed simple agriculture. Scribes at small writing tables diligently recorded everything from grain allotments to trade pacts, pressing cuneiform symbols into clay tablets. In earlier villages, communal memory relied on oral tradition and tokens, but Uruk's scribes now preserved facts, stories, and edicts with a permanence unimaginable a generation before. Walls soon arose around the main districts, constructed not just for ceremonial display but for genuine defense. Rumors of raids and shifting alliances in neighboring regions made the city's inhabitants realize they needed more than good farmland. They needed security. Over time, fortifications expanded to protect neighborhoods, workshops, and canals that fed the outlying fields. The social structure quickly adapted to this new reality. Priesthoods formed the spiritual core, ensuring a continuous relationship with the divine. Meanwhile, a distinct ruling council, often guided by a single powerful figure, organized military levies, commissioned building projects, and administered justice. This concentration of power was unprecedented, transforming Uruk into a magnet for ambitious individuals in search of influence and opportunity. City streets bustled with more than just commerce. In open squares, artisans taught apprentices to perfect their crafts, from pottery to weaving intricate designs on woolen cloaks. Skilled masons refined the shapes of bricks, ensuring larger temples and sturdier public halls. With every project, the city grew more confident in its ability to shape the environment rather than be shaped by it. Entertainment also flourished. Festivals dedicated to the harvest or deities became major community events, drawing thousands to plazas near the temple. Dancers adorned with bright fabrics performed to the beat of drums and flutes, reliving myths that placed Uruk at the center of cosmic tales. Whether through solemn religious rites or jubilant celebrations, life in the city thrummed with a vitality never before seen in these lands. Trade routes that once carried small caravans to rural hamlets now converged on Uruk's bustling gates. Merchants negotiated with temple officials, exchanging cereals for metals, hardwoods, and rare stones. This wealth of incoming resources helped transform the cityscape, fueling additional construction and attracting new waves of settlers hoping to find their fortune. Uruk, once a mere settlement, now commanded a far-reaching economic network. Leaders recognized the importance of orchestrating law and order, since growing populations inevitably brought disputes. Gradually, a rudimentary form of city-state governance emerged, where local councils cooperated with religious figures. Temple records provided evidence of contracts and taxes, preventing theft or corruption from undermining trust. It was a fragile system, evolving through trial and error, but it established a precedent for formal governance in the region. Despite its triumphs, Uruk did not forget the challenges that faced its agrarian foundation. Periodic droughts threatened to reduce the bountiful fields to sun-baked wastelands. City officials dispatched engineers to inspect canals, dams, and storage basins. If a single levee failed, the effort of years could be lost overnight. In these tense times, the entire city mobilized, demonstrating that unity remained crucial to survival. Not everyone welcomed the pace of change. Some longtime farmers worried that temple demands were too great, and that scribes' ledgers weighed more heavily than traditional customs. Debates simmered over how best to maintain harmony. Was centralized power a safeguard or an overreach? Yet despite occasional tensions, Uruk pressed forward, continually expanding to accommodate new ideas, new hands, and new gods rumored to bless each district. The city itself became a beacon for smaller settlements seeking protection or trade ties. People from the fringes of the Tigris-Euphrates corridor ventured to see Uruk's soaring temples, sophisticated shops, and organized institutions. Many returned to their homes inspired to build larger communal storehouses or adopt the newly refined techniques in pottery and weaving. In this way, Uruk's innovations rippled across the entire land. Outsiders hailed Uruk's ascendancy as the hallmark of a new epoch. Where earlier villages had been content to band together for survival, Uruk thrived on ambition, monumental building, and continual adaptation. Its story of rapid expansion, religious centrality, and economic magnetism set a pattern that other rising city-states would emulate. Thus began the era of truly urban civilization, with Uruk standing proudly at the forefront, ushering in an unprecedented chapter of human endeavor. Chapter 4, Cuneiform, the Script of Eternity. From the heart of bustling cities like Uruk, quiet corners of temple courtyards echoed with the careful scratching of styluses on wet clay. Here, in these modest but vital spaces, history was being forever transformed. The once oral world of Mesopotamia began to take physical form through cuneiform writing, an ingenious method of pressing wedge-shaped marks into carefully flattened tablets. Long before symbols were etched into clay, merchants and officials had struggled to keep track of livestock, grain shipments, and labor obligations. Simple clay tokens enclosed in baked envelopes offered a clue. Each token stood for a jar of oil or a bundle of wool, but breaking an envelope meant destroying the record. To preserve accountability and reduce disputes, administrators started imprinting symbols directly on the clay, rendering each transaction visible to anyone who knew how to read the marks. Early symbols were pictures, straightforward sketches of the items they represented. A circle might stand for a sheep, a wavy line for water, a jar shape for oil. Over time, scribes discovered that by tilting the reed stylus at various angles, they could form repeated wedge-like impressions. These wedges, cunei, allowed for faster writing and an entire catalog of abstract signs that captured not just objects, but sounds and ideas as well. As these signs multiplied, clay tablets became carriers of information far broader than inventory lists. Myths, prayers, treaties, and even personal letters found their way into this new script. An epic story could be recorded line by line, ensuring it would not vanish with the passing of the storytellers. Suddenly, knowledge could leap beyond the confines of one person's memory, connecting generation to generation in an unbroken chain. This growing sophistication turned scribes into key figures within every major city. Training to be a scribe involved countless hours practicing wedge impressions on damp clay, perfecting the balance between clarity and speed. Students learned to replicate the standard signs that formed the basis of cuneiform, sometimes reciting them as if each was a sacred incantation. Upon mastering the craft, scribes became invaluable assets to temples, palaces, and merchant houses alike. A scribe's table needed only a clean piece of clay, a sharpened reed, and a steady hand. The clay, often gathered from the same riverbanks that fed the fields, became the medium on which rulers asserted their power and priesthoods documented each offering to the gods. Once inscribed, a tablet could be sun-dried or kiln-fired for greater permanence. Archives quickly sprang up, orderly stacks of tablets, each carefully labeled, forming libraries of knowledge that spanned centuries. Thanks to cuneiform, trade routes expanded more confidently. Merchants traveling to distant territories carried small tablets detailing every item of cargo. Upon arrival, local officials could compare the shipment against the written contract, reducing disputes. Cuneiform's clarity in listing goods and prices, and in noting who owed whom, turned commerce into a more reliable endeavor, tying distant regions together in profitable exchange. At the same time, temples utilized writing to regulate religious life. Ceremonial events, from animal sacrifices to festival processions, were meticulously logged. A new generation of hymn writers emerged, penning devotions that were copied and shared among scribes in neighboring cities. Each recorded prayer reinforced a shared cultural identity, one that transcended local boundaries and shaped what it meant to be part of the Sumerian world. Royal inscriptions showcased yet another dimension. Kings ordered steles, tall stone pillars carved with cuneiform, celebrating military victories or divine sanction. These records turned ephemeral triumphs into public statements for all to see, proclaiming that their rule was not just an accident of fate but an outcome willed by the heavens themselves. Writing thus magnified the authority of the ruling class, anchoring power in the permanence of baked clay or chiseled stone. Over generations, scribes and scholars refined the script. Consonants and vowels from the spoken language found representation among cuneiform's wedges, allowing the words of daily speech to flow more naturally across each tablet. Scholars composed grammar guides, setting standards that could be taught in scribal schools. Such consistency ensured that a message written in one city could be read and understood in another, no matter how distant. Yet cuneiform was not restricted to officialdom alone. Personal letters began circulating, often capturing the intimacy of family concerns. One might send a note to a relative in another town, requesting a shipment of fish or announcing the safe birth of a child. The practicality of writing seeped into everyday life, granting people of various backgrounds a voice in matters great and small. As the script spread, so too did the stories of gods and heroes. Tales once told by firelight could now be set down, capturing every flourish of drama. Among the greatest was the saga of Gilgamesh, rumored to have originated in the oral traditions of Uruk. In cuneiform form, the story of this heroic king and his quest for meaning echoed well beyond Sumer's frontiers, enthralling future empires with its timeless themes of friendship, love, and the pursuit of immortality. While it required years to master, cuneiform wielded an unparalleled power to knit people together across space and time. Temple economies grew more efficient as taxes and tithes were meticulously tracked. Treaties sealed in clay redefined intercity diplomacy, and scribal libraries preserved the collective memory of a civilization in progress. Those familiar wedge marks transcended personal speech, forging a universal system that linked city to city through knowledge. This new skill did come at a cost. Not everyone could read and write, so scribes held a special status, forming an educated elite who sometimes wielded influence over decisions. Moreover, the intricacies of cuneiform demanded a lifetime of upkeep. The script would evolve and splinter into regional variations. Yet it was precisely because of cuneiform's complexity that it endured, adjusted, and survived over centuries, becoming as much a cultural beacon as the grandest temple spire. The innovation of cuneiform drew its last stroke far beyond Mesopotamia's earliest days, influencing how entire regions conceptualized governance, myth, and shared experience. Its footprints can be seen in the alphabets that later rose in the Eastern Mediterranean, a quiet reminder that from these clay impressions grew humanity's passion for recording its dreams, its triumphs, and even its frailties for all time to come. Chapter 5: Gods, Temples, and Cosmic Order. Sumerian society was inseparable from the divine presence believed to permeate every corner of daily life. From the rising of the sun to the quiet hush of dusk, people sought signs of approval or warnings from the pantheon of gods who were said to guide fate itself. No work began without some small libation or whispered prayer, lest a laborer risk offending these invisible overseers who held sway over both harvest and health. No god stood alone in this multi-layered cosmology. Each major deity watched over a crucial aspect of existence: air, water, love, war, fertility, and cities each hailed a patron who took particular guardianship over that region. Enlil, in many myths, was imagined as a lofty authority who commanded storms and the destinies of kings. Enki, also called Ea, ruled the underground waters, revered for his cleverness and benevolence toward mortals. Inanna could embody both passionate love and devastating fury, her presence simultaneously comforting and fearsome. Temples dedicated to these powers became the spiritual hearts of every city-state. Their upper terraces loomed over surrounding neighborhoods, visible proof that mortal affairs should forever be oriented toward higher powers. The architecture alone spoke volumes. Towering facades decorated with precious inlays, gates that opened onto vast courtyards, and inner sanctuaries where images of the gods were kept behind guarded doors. Pilgrims came from afar to bow before a city's divine patron, trusting that a favorable offering might secure blessings of prosperity. Priests and priestesses, often regarded as direct mediators with the unseen realm, took on roles that extended far beyond ritual. They supervised the temple estates, which included farmland, livestock, and workshops. Temple officials hired scribes to record every bushel of grain and every animal brought as an offering. Over time, these religious institutions accumulated wealth and influence, sometimes rivaling the power of the king's palace. Yet for the devout, there was no confusion about divine hierarchy. Priestly authority was considered an extension of the god's will. In grand ceremonies, the city gathered at the temple courtyard, transforming worship into both a communal and theatrical affair. Trumpets and drums thundered alongside recited hymns, punctuating the approach of sacred statues, occasionally paraded on elaborate boats or chariots. Offerings piled high, baskets of barley, jugs of oil, and flocks of lambs. Only a fraction of the faithful would witness the mysterious rituals inside the innermost sanctum, but all believed in the ceremony's power to maintain cosmic equilibrium. Behind closed temple walls, priests performed complex rites meant to interpret the god's desires. Sometimes, this involved reading omens in the livers of sacrificed sheep or gauging the meaning of unusual celestial alignments. A sudden flood or a drought might be explained as an act of displeasure from the deity. These interpretations shaped policy and daily life. An unfavorable reading might postpone a planned canal expansion or even delay a royal coronation. Individual devotion found expression in smaller shrines set up in private homes. It was not uncommon to see little altars or clay figurines dedicated to household protectors, gods who might avert illness, aid childbirth, or grant a bountiful catch to a fisherman. This personal side of faith complemented the grand public festivals. While majestic temples united the city in shared reverence, these intimate spaces allowed people to seek comfort and guidance in simpler, heartfelt moments. On a broader scale, the entire cosmos was portrayed in Sumerian myths as a carefully orchestrated system, poised between chaos and order. Mountains, rivers, winds, and storms were all under the sway of divine personalities, each thread contributing to the grand tapestry of existence. Humanity's role was to cooperate, to keep the cosmic balance from tipping into disarray. This sense of cosmic responsibility imbued everyday chores, sewing, weaving, or building, with a hint of the sacred. The monarchy leveraged religious devotion, too. Kings claimed divinely sanctioned authority, styling themselves as the chosen executors of the god's will. Some even dared to depict themselves as near-divine, forging a direct link between their leadership and the fate of the city. However, the temple remained an anchor of spiritual identity, capable of blessing or challenging royal decisions, which is why prudent monarchs cultivated alliances with high priests and sponsored lavish temple expansions. Cuneiform texts uncovered in temple archives reveal stories of lavish banquets thrown in honor of the gods, with priests carefully tracking each detail, the quantities of wine poured, the meats and breads consumed, and the precise incantations offered. These banquets, though symbolic, showcased the constant interplay between mortal generosity and divine favor. Festivals frequently involved the entire urban populace, melding raucous celebration with solemn ceremony. Pilgrims visiting from other regions were likewise dazzled. Stepping into the precinct of a major temple, they would encounter a swirl of color, music, and incense unlike anything found in a smaller village shrine. Some of these travelers bore gifts for local deities, hoping to gain favor or forge bonds with city leaders. Over time, these interactions helped spread religious ideas, forging subtle cultural ties across the Mesopotamian landscape. Reverence for the gods did not suppress curiosity. Temple schools often championed learning, devoting resources to astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. Observing the movement of stars, diagnosing illnesses based on signs from the body, and charting the rhythms of floods all grew from a desire to better interpret the divine blueprint. Religious duties and academic inquiry thus intertwined, reflecting a worldview in which science and faith converged in the pursuit of harmony. By weaving devotion into every sphere of life, Sumerian society bound itself to the idea that any breach in cosmic balance would provoke calamity. Whether fear or love guided them, the people believed that temples secured the fragile peace between mortals and the unstoppable forces that guided weather, birth, harvest, and death. In this dynamic interplay of human aspiration and divine authority, the Sumerians shaped a theology so influential that echoes of it would reverberate through countless empires and spiritual traditions yet to rise. Chapter 6: Kings, Palaces, and the Quest for Supremacy. Kings in Sumerian cities were not always born into gentle circumstances. In early generations, a strong individual emerged when crises demanded unity, whether a devastating flood or a military threat. Over time, these provisional war leaders or skilled organizers grew into fully vested monarchs, claiming lineage from divine powers. Their palaces rose within city walls, clear counterparts to the towering temples, each structure representing one half of the city's guiding forces. A palace did more than house its ruler. It was a nerve center where scribes maintained population counts and tax records, where engineers planned new irrigation canals, and where envoys from neighboring cities arrived with offerings or sought to broker alliances. Shining corridors displayed carved reliefs of triumphant battles or victorious hunts, visual reminders that the king stood at the apex of mortal authority, whether leading armies or hosting state banquets. The monarchy's influence reached deep into the countryside as well. Even the remotest barley fields fell under the king's protective gaze. Governors, appointed or confirmed by royal decree, ensured that taxes flowed regularly back to the capital. Cuneiform tablets in palace archives meticulously documented each bushel of grain and each pelt of wool. Under a capable monarch, peasants felt a degree of security, better maintained canals, more trade caravans, and fewer raids by ambitious neighboring cities. Rivalries, however, were inevitable in a land where each city-state possessed its own proud traditions. When two cities coveted the same fertile plain or struggled over rights to a crucial canal, kings were quick to marshal their forces. Even as alliances shifted, betrayals were a constant possibility, and the lines between friend and foe blurred. A treaty might last until the next harvest, then unravel at the sound of a single battle horn. Fortified walls reflected these uncertainties. City dwellers understood that a monarch's ambition might one day save them from foreign intrusion, but on another day, he might lead them into a costly campaign. If those battles went poorly, it was the common folk who paid in lost farms, stolen livestock, or forced conscription. Despite this, many still rallied behind their king, believing that only strong leadership could guarantee prosperity in a world crowded with fractious powers. To ensure loyalty, monarchs often emphasized religious legitimacy. In official declarations and carved steels, they proclaimed themselves chosen by the gods or even semi-divine in their own right. During festivals, they performed rituals side by side with high priests, petitioning for good harvests and divine protection. By fusing divine sanction to royal authority, kings shaped a narrative that made their leadership seem not just practical but sacred. At the same time, kings seized upon every technological and organizational advantage. Armies were structured with specialized units, from swift chariots, early wooden constructs with solid wheels, to archers equipped with powerful composite bows. Maintaining such a force demanded extensive resources. Enough grain to feed soldiers through campaigns, plus metal for weapons and chariot fittings. Control of trade routes became paramount, and the palace sponsored expeditions to secure metals or timber from distant lands. Within palace workshops, Artisans received royal patronage to create luxury goods that elevated the court's prestige. Ornate jewelry encrusted with lapis lazuli might adorn the queen, while grand bronze sculptures displayed the king's victories. Royal banquets showcased both the wealth of the realm and the opulence of the monarchy. Many of those privileged crafters thrived under the king's protection, enjoying a social status far above that of ordinary laborers. To project influence beyond city walls, kings married daughters to princes of neighboring domains or accepted foreign brides themselves. These unions wove together treaties as tightly as they mixed bloodlines, creating webs of kinship that sometimes brought a fragile peace. Palace scribes dispatched letters across dusty roads, formalizing pacts or delivering warnings. Yet even kinship was not fail-proof. History abounded with examples of in-laws turning adversaries after a souring of fortunes. Ambition, though, was rarely sated. A king who seized control of multiple city-states might dream of forging a single realm that stretched across the entire river valley. Yet each victory brought new demands. Appeasing local priests, building roads to bind newly won territories, and quelling periodic uprisings. The higher one climbed, the more precarious the throne became, especially in a land of intensifying rivalries and constant jostling for power. Ordinary people watched with mixed emotions as kings rose and fell. On one hand, a strong monarch could unite a fractured region, build grand temples, and ensure consistent water regulation. On the other, wars demanded heavy tribute and took a toll on their sons, marched off to fight. Still, some glimpsed the possibility that unity might spare them the repeated strife of city fighting city. They listened to proclamations of victory, hoping that each new conquest would yield a more secure tomorrow. Through it all, the concept of kingship gained an almost mythic status. Murals, poems, and festival reenactments showed these rulers as towering figures whose mandates shaped destinies. Whether one revered them or criticized their folly, no one could deny the transformative role they played. Beneath the majesty of palaces and clamor of armies lay the heartbeat of a civilization forging its identity through unity and conflict, invention and tradition. The will of mortals and blessings of the gods braided together in a complex tapestry. Chapter 7. A Golden Age Shaped by Prosperity. The intensifying rhythm of urban life gradually lifted Sumer into a phase of unprecedented wealth. Surging trade routes and rich harvests made well-fed populations possible, and out of this abundance arose new opportunities for art, architecture, and learning. Families who had once scraped by now found themselves with surplus grain, which they exchanged for metals, exotic stones, and hardwood from faraway lands. Caravans became a common sight, traversing dusty roads laden with bundles that gleamed under the scorching sun. As cities grew safer and more prosperous, civic pride blossomed. Monumental building projects, most notably the expansion of ziggurats, took center stage. These colossal terraces, formed of layer upon layer of sun-dried brick, seemed to bridge earth and heaven. Each renovation demanded a vast workforce. Mudbrick makers, porters, masons, and scribes. Even residents from surrounding villages contributed labor in exchange for rations from the city's burgeoning storehouses. The result was nothing short of architectural wonder, visible from miles away. An outpouring of artistry paralleled these grand constructions. At local workshops, jewelers experimented with lapis lazuli, a mesmerizing blue stone imported at great expense from distant mountains. Goldsmiths and silversmiths embellished ceremonial cups, daggers, and headdresses fit for the wealthiest citizens. Intricately engraved cylinder seals, tiny cylinders rolled onto wet clay to mark ownership, became essential personal items, each design reflecting its owner's status or devotion to a particular deity. This same flourishing spirit touched daily life in more modest ways. Potteries perfected new vessel shapes ideal for grain storage and cooking. Weavers refined their looms, producing brightly patterned textiles that draped the halls of both temples and palaces. With a steady food supply, people had the liberty to hone specialized skills. The collective output of these skilled hands added new layers of sophistication to markets brimming with fine goods. At every turn, temples played a vital role in this prosperity. Their storehouses received abundant offerings, grains, livestock, and precious metals dedicated to the gods. In turn, temple administrators redistributed resources to maintain canals, feed laborers on public works, and host community festivals. For devotees, these events offered a sense of shared purpose. Religious ceremonies, accompanied by music and dance, transformed worship into celebration, reminding everyone of their place in a grand cosmic design that seemed to grant their fields perpetual abundance. Palaces, too, kept pace with this upswing. Kings declared their realms open for business, forging trade ties with caravanners who brought foreign wonders from beyond Mesopotamia's frontiers. Royal scribes drafted treaties, ensuring safe passage for merchants willing to pay taxes and tribute. As the city dwellers enjoyed a wider array of foods and luxuries, the monarchy's reputation soared, hailed for guaranteeing an era where markets thrived and city walls stood tall. This relative peace, however, did not mean an end to competition. Water remained a precious resource, and when rivers shifted or canals fell into disrepair, tensions flared between neighboring city-states. Yet the overarching narrative was one of confidence. People believed in progress, in the possibility that each building, each innovation, carried them closer to a lasting harmony. Clashes, when they arose, were brief disruptions in what many hoped was a permanent golden age. Cuneiform writing advanced rapidly under these favorable conditions. Scribes weren't just counting livestock or measuring acres of barley anymore. They ventured into poetry, detailed accounts of mythic heroes, and records of legal precedents. Grand epics circulated from city to city, fueling conversations about destiny, morality, and divine interplay. Knowledge multiplied in temple archives, where tablets on mathematics and astronomy hinted at an emerging scientific curiosity. The courts of kings dazzled with pomp and ceremony. Formal receptions welcomed foreign delegates with music, platters of roasted meats, and sweet date wines. Skilled musicians performed on lyres and harps, their melodies echoing through columned halls. Even as new alliances were formed, there was an unstated competition. Which city boasted the finest ziggurat, the most learned scribes, or the most elaborate festival rites? Such rivalries, conducted in the spirit of cultural pride, spurred even greater achievements. All the while, the countryside thrived on well-tended fields. With improved irrigation systems, barley and wheat harvests reached new heights, and orchard groves yielded dates aplenty. Farmers who made their living off the land enjoyed greater stability, often trading surplus with traveling merchants who carried goods back to the city markets. This economic loop strengthened ties between rural and urban populations, weaving them into one interdependent whole. Artisans working in clay, metal, and precious gems found a never-ending appetite for their wares. Temple expansions required decorative reliefs, palaces demanded imposing statues for throne rooms, and wealthy merchants requested fine ornaments to display their success. The cumulative effect was a vibrant economy that funneled resources into every layer of society. Sculptors and jewelers emerged as minor celebrities, their reputations carried by word of mouth until a king or high priest summoned them to execute a grand commission. Despite these achievements, a current of anxiety lingered beneath the city's jubilant surface. In the more distant corners of Mesopotamia, less fortunate tribes eyed the Sumerian wealth with envy. Nomadic groups threatened trade routes. Mountainous clans occasionally tested the boundaries. Everyone sensed that fortunes could shift swiftly if the environment or politics took a turn. Yet while the golden age lasted, the people built, traded, worshipped, and innovated at a breathtaking pace, collectively shaping Sumer into a radiant symbol of human creativity and potential. Chapter 8: Reform and Revolution in Lagash. Lagash was no stranger to the prosperity washing over Sumer. Its storehouses brimmed with grain, and caravans found a lively marketplace upon arrival. Yet in the corridors of power, murmurs of discontent stirred. Priests, charged with managing temple wealth, exacted high fees for blessings and rituals. Corruption seeped into bureaucratic corners, where officials demanded extra tolls. Those who toiled in the fields or crafted goods in tiny workshops whispered that the city's grandeur rested too heavily on their burdened backs. This undercurrent of unrest ultimately propelled a figure named Uruk into the public eye. His origins were modest enough that he had once worked side by side with ordinary citizens, hearing their gripes firsthand. Over time, his administrative talents and sense of fairness drew notice. Appointed to increasingly prominent roles, he began rallying support from those who believed the city's potential was being squandered by self-serving elites. When he assumed power, few in Lagash's old guard foresaw the sweeping changes he would undertake. Previous rulers had enforced strict hierarchies that benefited temples and aristocrats, but Uruk set out to uproot these norms. He believed that the city's prosperity should serve a broader population, not merely a few officials enriched by bribes and inflated taxes. Almost immediately, he enacted a series of proclamations designed to curb the temple's overreach and protect commoners. One of his boldest moves was addressing debts. Many farmers and tradespeople had been compelled to offer their lands, or even their personal freedom, as collateral for loans arranged through temple authorities. With each failed harvest or delayed payment, the debtors sank deeper into servitude. Uruk nullified a portion of these crushing obligations, freeing families from generational bondage. People long shackled by fear suddenly glimpsed a more hopeful future. He also tackled judicial corruption, a practice so normalized that entire families had been ruined by trumped-up fines and extortion. Under his reforms, judges faced greater accountability. Officials caught accepting bribes were stripped of their status, their wrongful judgments reversed. Victims of injustice lined up outside the palace courts, bearing decades-old grievances in cuneiform tablets, all clamoring for redress. While the process was messy, it signaled that the winds of change blew strongly through Lagash. Temple reform stirred the fiercest backlash. Priests had traditionally commanded the city's most valuable resources, fields that yielded harvests for sacrificial offerings, herds kept for ritual slaughter, and workshops responsible for crafting religious artifacts. Though Uruk never dismissed the temple's spiritual authority, he demanded transparent accounting of its wealth and fair treatment for temple workers. No longer could priests claim arbitrary tributes or misuse their power to aggrandize themselves at the expense of the faithful. Tensions inevitably flared. Traditional power holders, alarmed by their shrinking privileges, conspired to undermine Uruk authority. Some spread rumors that he was an irreverent upstart, dangerously tampering with Sumer's sacred order. Skirmishes erupted in the outskirts, where local lords once tied to the temple refused to accept his edicts. Yet the new ruler clung steadfastly to his vision. He rallied popular support and sealed alliances with influential scribes and overseers who respected his sense of justice. Scribes in the palace meticulously recorded these new ordinances on clay tablets, distributing them to district administrators. For many citizens, this was their first brush with codified protections. While laws had long existed in an unwritten, customary form, they often favored the influential. Uruk written reforms, albeit limited and sometimes unevenly enforced, presented something tangible, the promise that oppression could be combated with legal recourse. In the midst of this upheaval, Lagash did not neglect its cultural and economic vigor. Artisan quarters continued to hum, producing pottery and textiles popular in regional trade. The city hosted visiting caravans with the same warm welcome it had before, eager to demonstrate that it remained prosperous despite internal realignments. If anything, reforms improved morale. Merchants and farmers alike reported feeling more secure under a system that aimed, however imperfectly, to be fair. During festival times, the populace filled Lagash's streets and squares, celebrating their traditions with newfound optimism. Priests carried on their rites in the temple, though with tempered privilege. Ordinary folk brought offerings as they always had, but there was an undercurrent of pride. They participated out of devotion rather than compelled duty. Many believed that perhaps Lagash's patron deity smiled on the city's evolving social contract, one balanced more clearly between piety and equity. Such a shift did not pass unnoticed in other Sumerian centers. In neighboring city-states, officials and aristocrats feared the example set by Lagash. Tales of debt absolution and curbed priestly powers traveled swiftly, stirring curiosity among the common folk elsewhere. Some rulers quietly admired Uruk-Agina's boldness, while others saw in it a threat to the status quo. Diplomats approached Lagash uncertainly, not sure whether to ally with or sabotage its renegade policies. Despite external anxieties, Lagash thrived under these reforms for a time. Peasants produced more grain, relieved of backbreaking taxes. Lesser officials found it risky to engage in old-style corruption, knowing the new regime cracked down with surprising vigilance. Skilled laborers and scribes felt valued, their work recognized as essential to the city's restructured economy and administration. Critics might have sneered at the idealism, but day-to-day realities improved for many. Inevitably, the city faced external pressure. Rival states that had once accepted the temple's diplomatic influence saw opportunity in the transition's turmoil. Armies tested Lagash's defenses, suspecting internal divisions might weaken its response. Uruk-Agina, though devoted to social progress, was no pacifist. He organized fortifications and ensured loyal generals protected the city's strategic canal routes. Citizens, grateful for his reforms, supported efforts to ward off any invasion. These combined efforts at social transformation and military vigilance underscore just how remarkable Lagash had become. In an era where absolute authority typically flowed from temple or throne, Uruk-Agina wove a hybrid system emphasizing broader civic responsibility. Though it would not endure forever, his courageous experiment left a permanent mark on Sumer's historical memory. Across the region, people spoke in hushed tones of the city that temporarily redefined governance, daring to believe that even ancient traditions could evolve when driven by vision and conscience. Chapter 9. Enter the mighty Akkadians. Far to the north of Sumer's bustling cities lay a shifting frontier where Semitic-speaking peoples mingled with older Mesopotamian communities. Among these groups arose a singular figure whose name would echo through time: Sargon of Akkad. Legends held that he was once an orphan, set adrift on the Euphrates in a reed basket, an echo of stories that would inspire later civilizations. Whether true or embellished, the tale suited a man who would seize destiny with both hands. He began in the service of Kish, an influential city that lay between the Sumerian heartland and the wilder lands beyond. Clever, charismatic, and tactically astute, Sargon gained the trust of local warriors and overseers. When political strife engulfed Kish, he emerged from the turmoil as its master, uniting a restless populace behind his banner. It was not long before he looked southward, his gaze falling on Sumer's rich and fractious city-states. Sargon's ambitions seemed audacious at first. No single ruler had ever subdued all of Sumer's fiercely independent communities. Yet one by one, he brought them under his control, sometimes by force, sometimes by cunning diplomacy. Cities that had so confidently governed themselves, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, found themselves facing a new political reality. Unable to withstand his disciplined forces or outmaneuver his deals, they yielded to this emerging juggernaut from Akkad. In the aftermath of each victory, Sargon installed loyal governors to oversee local affairs. Though Sumer retained its traditions, it was now threaded into a central administration. Edicts from Akkad's capital traveled down fresh roads and along the rivers, carried by swift messengers. Taxes formerly paid to local kings began flowing to Sargon, funding his next campaigns and securing the loyalty of crucial officers. An entire region once fractured by rivalry felt the first tremors of an empire in the making. The conquered populace had mixed reactions. Some Sumerians resented foreign dominion, They held fast to the belief that their gods and kings had guided them for centuries without outside interference. Others saw an opportunity. Under Sargon's rule, commerce routes multiplied, and caravans crossing the region felt safer from bandits. Traders and artisans, eager to expand markets, sometimes welcomed the stability. Certainly, the scribal class adapted quickly. Akkadian became the language of administration, but Sumerian remained vital for temple rituals and scholarship. Akkad itself, Sargon's capital, became legendary. Though its exact location remains elusive to modern archaeologists, its renown was unquestioned in ancient texts. It thrived on tribute from conquered lands, boasting storehouses filled with grains and precious metals. Bronzesmiths, newly arrived from distant corners of the empire, produced weapons and chariot fittings that kept the Akkadian military steps ahead of potential rebels. Grand palaces rose in tribute to Sargon's might, and emissaries ventured forth to secure fresh alliances. Accompanying this centralization was an administrative revolution. Akkadian scribes documented everything from troop movements to temple donations on clay tablets in cuneiform script. They refined accounting methods to handle the empire's broader scale. In doing so, they effectively built a bureaucratic skeleton upon which Sargon hung the muscles of political power. Regions that once viewed themselves as independent now answered to this smoothly coordinated web of overseers. While some local rulers tried to preserve a semblance of autonomy, none could muster enough force to shatter the growing empire. Even if a city rebelled, Sargon's armies converged rapidly, quashing uprisings with grim efficiency. Then, as if to underline the new reality, fresh officials were dispatched to reset the city's governance. For inhabitants who remembered Lagash's reforms or the proud lineage of Uruk's kings, these changes came as a stark reminder. Times had changed, and the old hierarchies were falling away. Yet the empire was not solely a project of conquest. Sargon also cultivated relationships with the northern lands and beyond, expanding trade into regions that Sumerians had rarely reached. Textiles from the southern cities appeared in highland markets, exchanged for timber, metals, and other vital resources. Ports near the Persian Gulf boomed with new vigor, shipping goods between the empire's core and distant seafaring cultures. The flow of materials sparked bursts of creativity. Sculptors worked new stone imports into regal statues, and metalworkers fused techniques from diverse traditions. Meanwhile, the empire's unity gave religion another dimension. Akkadian rulers paid homage to Sumer's ancient gods, acknowledging local deities to assuage potential dissent. But they also elevated their own divine patrons, especially Ishtar, akin to Sumer's Inanna, building new temples that placed the goddess at the symbolic heart of the empire. In bilingual inscriptions, scribes praised both Sumerian and Akkadian gods, weaving old and new pieties into a single imperial tapestry. As tales of Sargon's triumphs spread, so did the mystique of Akkad. Poets and chroniclers celebrated him as king of the four quarters, implying a dominion that covered the known world. Whether or not these claims were exaggerated mattered less than their powerful effect on morale. Many believed a new era had begun, guided by a conqueror whose vigor and vision reached beyond anything Sumer had witnessed. Others, however, whispered that centralized might was a double-edged sword. The more land Sargon seized, the more he had to defend, and the more complex his empire became. Nevertheless, Sargon's immediate success was undeniable. For the first time in history, a significant portion of Mesopotamia stood unified under a single administration. Many roads led to Akkad, and caravans used those roads in a sweeping network that transmitted goods and ideas from one city to the next. The concept of empire, of dozens of once independent centers bound under one banner, took root in the region's collective consciousness. Sumer would never be quite the same, its identity now tied to a mightier political framework that promised safety and stability, while also demanding loyalty and tribute. And so, with Sargon's ascendancy, the story of Sumer pivoted. The era of disparate city-states receded, at least for a time, as Akkadian authority imprinted itself across plains and canals. Even the proudest of local traditions could not entirely resist. In the midst of all this upheaval, the seeds of a broader Mesopotamian culture were sown, one that fused Sumerian heritage with Akkadian drive, forging a new chapter in the saga of civilization. Chapter 10. Triumph and Turmoil under Naram-Sin. With Sargon's imprint firmly established, the Akkadian Empire continued to expand through the reigns of his successors. Among them, none shone brighter or caused more controversy than his grandson, Naram-Sin. Emulating Sargon's ambition, Naram-Sin waged campaigns into lands beyond Mesopotamia's traditional borders, extending the empire's influence into mountainous regions and along desert fringes where Akkad's name had previously been unknown. Victories piled up, and with each triumph, he demanded tribute that enriched his capital and fueled further conquest. As tales of his exploits spread, Naram-Sin crafted a powerful public image. Scribes recorded his battlefield successes, inscribing them into clay and etching them onto stone monuments. In some depictions, he towered above vanquished enemies, the wedge-shaped cuneiform praising him as king of the four regions. He wore a horned crown in those carvings, previously an icon reserved only for gods, implying he possessed a divine aura. This symbolic act scandalized certain temple circles that had long held to the idea that kings, though chosen by gods, must remain mortal. Despite these murmurs of dissent, Naram-Sin sustained his authority through careful governance. He formalized new administrative posts, often staffed by those who owed their fortunes entirely to his favor. These officials supervised trade routes, levied taxes, and maintained local militias against outside threats. With a rigorous hierarchy in place, resources and information flowed swiftly to the throne, giving the ruler unprecedented insight into affairs across the realm. Many believed that only such tight coordination could preserve an empire of this scope. Yet success had its price. The more distant the conquests, the more pressure bore down on the core of Akkad. Logistics grew complicated as caravans hauled supplies over rugged mountain passes, and officials were spread thin, administering lands with diverse customs and languages. Scribes documented the growing strain on temple granaries that had to feed soldiers garrisoned far from home. Meanwhile, local chieftains, once subdued, watched closely for any sign of weakening resolve in the imperial center. Within Sumer itself, older generations raised eyebrows at Naram-Sin's growing sense of self-deification. For centuries, the region had maintained a delicate balance between priestly authority and the king's mortal role as shepherd of the people. By embracing near-divine status, Naram-Sin risked angering not only humans but also the gods. Rumors circulated that Enlil, lord of air and sovereignty, looked with disfavor upon a mortal wearing a horned crown. A few pious scribes went so far as to hint that disastrous portents, droughts, failing harvests, or sudden raids, might be retributions for this hubris. Beyond religious concerns, administration became more unwieldy. Local officials often navigated a tricky line between loyalty to Akkad and appeasing their own communities. Some used imperial mandates as cover for personal enrichment, undermining the solidarity that Naram-Sin strove to create. When corruption seeped into the countryside, peasants and craftspeople suffered the brunt of excessive taxation, fueling sporadic uprisings. Though these revolts were typically crushed, each event eroded the empire's unity a little more. External pressures also multiplied. To the east, rugged tribes in the Zagros Mountains saw opportunity in any perceived weakness, raiding caravans and harassing Akkadian outposts. In the north, groups skilled in horsemanship tested newly forged borders. Despite Naram-Sin's formidable army, legendary for its discipline and advanced weaponry, his officers were constantly on the move, attempting to quell unrest in one region before rushing to confront rebellion in another. The emperor's reputation for invincibility faced its sternest test in confrontations with the Elamites, who occupied parts of modern southwestern Iran. Although many Elamite polities had once paid homage to Akkad, Their loyalties swayed with the shifting fortunes of the imperial court. When they rebelled, entire networks of trade unraveled almost overnight, cutting off vital sources of metals and stones. Naram-Sin responded with aggressive campaigns, carrying the fight deep into Elamite territory. Some victories were grand, but each confrontation drained resources and morale. In the midst of these challenges, cultural exchange flourished in unexpected ways. Akkadian garrisons introduced cuneiform writing in distant towns, and local craftsmen fused Akkadian styles with their native traditions. Temples in outlying cities began honoring a mixture of Sumerian and Akkadian deities, forging new pantheons unique to each region. Even as conflicts flared, a deeper tapestry of shared ideas and technologies threaded through the empire's many cultures. At the same time, Naram-Sin undertook extensive building projects, determined to solidify his legacy. Cities under his influence witnessed the construction of new walls, ziggurats, and palatial complexes. Contemporary inscriptions boasted that no enemy could shake the empire so richly adorned by its rulers' monuments. Many believed that these architectural feats, combined with the centralization of power, might ensure an era of unmatched stability. Still, the empire's sheer breadth caused mounting strain. Taxes soared to finance the endless campaigns and building efforts, prompting grumbles in even the most loyal Sumerian centers. Rulers of smaller city-states, bruised by repeated subjugation, plotted behind closed doors. Diplomatic notes passing between governors occasionally bore hints of conspiracy, though few were bold enough to act openly while Naram-Sin held sway. The cracks, however, were beginning to show. Despite these rumblings, his reign represented the apex of Akkadian influence. Tales of Naram-Sin's triumphs and larger-than-life persona spread in both awe and trepidation. In the eyes of his admirers, he epitomized the unstoppable conqueror, gifted with divine favor. In the eyes of his critics, he personified a dangerous break from Sumer's hallowed traditions. With each victory overshadowed by new trials, the tension between imperial might and overextension grew more palpable. In time, hindsight would reveal that Naram-Sin's reign, for all its splendor, marked the pivot between ascendant power and looming challenge. The empire that once swept up city after city encountered new and insidious threats on every frontier. Factions wary of centralized rule bided their time, and nature itself loomed as a silent adversary, capable of twisting rivers off their courses or inviting drought. Far-reaching dominion, impressive as it was, proved fragile once cracks formed in the mighty foundation. Sumer, meanwhile, felt each seismic shift keenly, wondering how much of its identity would endure amid the might of Akkad's greatest king. Chapter 11. The Gutian Interlude and Collapse. In the waning years of Akkadian dominance, internal discontent and outside pressures converged with alarming force. Well-organized though it was, the empire had stretched itself thin over vast territories, frequently at war with far-flung rebels. Weary garrisons coped with dwindling supplies, local governors squabbled for autonomy, and disillusioned farmers endured tax burdens that pressed them into near starvation. Into this tense environment swept a people known in Akkadian texts as the Gutians, descending from the rugged Zagros highlands like a hammer blow on weakened defenses. Their appearance in the historical record is abrupt and ominous. Akkadian scribes portrayed them as fierce and unyielding, describing how they raided trade routes and devastated crucial canal systems. While many scholars suspect the Gutians did not form a single unified people but rather a coalition of tribal groups, to the beleaguered Mesopotamians they seemed to arrive as one unstoppable horde. Their knowledge of mountain warfare and lightning raids overwhelmed vulnerable outposts unaccustomed to such tactics. Word of Gutian incursions sowed panic among Akkadian territories. Soldiers who had grown used to structured battle lines found themselves ambushed along remote pathways. Trade caravans, once assured protection, could no longer guarantee safe passage for goods. In some regions, local administrators capitulated rather than face brutal attacks. Elsewhere, peasants rose in rebellion of their own accord, exploiting the chaos to reject imperial authority. Each new pocket of lawlessness added to the empire's unraveling. At the heart of the empire, scribes struggled to update fragmented news streaming in from all corners. Tablets recorded the repeated pleas of provincial governors begging for more soldiers and supplies. But the once formidable Akkadian administration, straining under Naram-Sin's conquests and his successor's efforts to hold everything together, no longer had the capacity to respond effectively. As disorder spread, local strongmen seized power, dislodging imperial officials or swearing only nominal loyalty. The ravages of the Gutians extended beyond direct military upheaval. In many areas, they disrupted intricate irrigation channels that sustained agriculture. Fields turned fallow or became waterlogged when canals lay in disrepair. Cities that relied on steady grain flows began to shrink, with inhabitants fleeing to safer enclaves. Hunger stalked once prosperous regions, and old Sumerian city-states, already weary from the Akkadian yoke, found themselves facing severe depopulation and near-economic collapse. Some Gutian groups settled in pockets of Mesopotamia rather than simply pillaging. They established makeshift strongholds, often little more than rough camps that commanded key roads or fertile lands. By placing themselves like immovable stones in the empire's pathways, they choked off Akkadian influence in huge swathes of territory. In the fracturing mosaic of the region, certain Sumerian cities declared full independence, hoping the intruders were more interested in loot and grazing land than in sustained governance. That hope proved overly optimistic. Over time, some Gutian chieftains began calling themselves kings, minting an ad hoc rule atop the shattered remains of Akkad's bureaucracy. Their grasp of administration was limited, however, and the older temple networks and scribal traditions languished under the new order. Temple storehouses emptied without the structure that had once guaranteed a flow of offerings and taxes. Monumental buildings decayed, and cuneiform tablets disintegrated in abandoned archives. It was as though the achievements of centuries threatened to slip into oblivion. While much of the region slid into disarray, pockets of resilience emerged. Certain city-states, especially in the southern marshlands, found ways to fend off or avoid Gutian domination. They fortified their walls and orchestrated alliances with neighboring communities. As the Akkadian superstructure collapsed, these smaller entities attempted to salvage Sumer's heritage, maintaining rituals for their patron gods and clinging to scraps of centralized record-keeping that once defined their civilization. Amid the gloom, another formidable power bided its time, Elam, to the east. Though the Elamites had previously been subdued by Akkadian might, they now saw a chance to reassert themselves. Raiding parties crossed into battered Mesopotamian territory, seizing valuable resources and punishing any city that resisted. The Gutians, for all their fury, proved inconsistent rulers, and in many places, Elamite interlopers faced little opposition. It was in this vacuum that Sumerians realized the once vaunted empire had indeed fallen. The network of roads and garrisons painstakingly constructed under Sargon and Naram-Sin no longer functioned. Caravans risked robbery at every bend. Communities starved if harvests failed or canals fell into ruin. The sense of unity and shared destiny that had flourished under the Akkadian banner dispersed like dust on a desert wind. Scholars, crouched over chipped tablets in half-abandoned temple libraries, wondered if Sumer would ever again rise to the heights of old. Yet collapse, while devastating, cleared the stage for renewal. The Gutian Interlude, though chaotic, inadvertently gave certain southern cities the opportunity to rebuild their autonomy. Priests reasserted control over temples, determined to rally local communities under the protective gaze of their ancestral deities. Younger leaders emerged, claiming descent from ancient Sumerian lineages and promising to restore long-lost glory. These renewal efforts were not immediate. Many attempts faltered against the harsh realities of continued raids and uncertain alliances. But the seeds of revival were undeniable. Over time, a new generation of rulers in cities like Ur rediscovered the arts of governance and diplomacy. they patched together confederations strong enough to repel further incursions, reconnected damaged canals, and painstakingly revived the Sumerian cultural memory. Thus, the Gutian invasion, though brutal, signaled not an absolute end, but a tumultuous chapter that would ultimately catalyze Sumer's resurgence. The transformation that followed proved that even in ruin, human tenacity and communal spirit could reforge a civilization's core identity. For the moment, however, the region lay in darkness, its once glorious cities bruised and humbled. Many wondered if the flickering torch of Sumerian civilization had been permanently snuffed out, or if, perhaps, it might spark anew in the time to come. Chapter 12. The Resurgence, Ur-3 and a Radiant Renaissance. The Gutian grip gradually weakened as local Sumerian elites recovered their footing. From the ashes of the Akkadian collapse, pockets of defiance emerged, each determined to revive a semblance of the order that had once defined the region. Among these upstart leaders was Utu-Hegel of Uruk, who rallied forces to expel the last of the Gutian presence. Though his reign was short, his triumph opened the door for another bold ruler, Ur-Nammu of Ur, to step forward and seize the mantle of renewal. As Ur-Nammu took power, the city of Ur rose from a bruised outpost to become the powerhouse of a newly unified Sumer. The people, exhausted by years of instability, found hope in a leader who promised them safety and prosperity. Ur-Nammu restored farmland by dredging clogged canals, organizing corvée labor to rebuild earthen banks and dams. Fields that had lain fallow under Gutian mismanagement once again sprouted barley and wheat. Surplus harvests filled city granaries, and caravans of donkeys laden with trade goods reconnected Mesopotamia's battered trade routes. From the capital in Ur, a systematic bureaucracy took shape. Scribes meticulously recorded the distribution of grain, wool, and fish, ensuring a fair ration for laborers and armies. Temple archives, long neglected under foreign rule, once again buzzed with the activity of officials cataloging offerings for the gods. Where once confusion had reigned, a semblance of orderly governance returned. Ur-3, as modern historians would label this phase, set out to fuse the best of older Sumerian traditions with the lessons learned from Akkad's once far-reaching administration. A crowning achievement of Ur-Nammu was his legal code, fragments of which still survive in cuneiform tablets. In a world where unwritten conventions often led to corruption or exploitation, these carefully inscribed laws spelled out consequences for theft, violence, and other civic offenses. They also defined responsibilities for temple officials and local governors, discouraging the abuses that had fueled unrest in previous eras. Though not as famous as the later Code of Hammurabi, Ur-Nammu's edicts signaled a pioneering effort to enshrine justice in a systematic written form. To demonstrate the city's restored grandeur, Ur-Nammu sponsored architectural works on a scale reminiscent of the old Akkadian heyday. At the heart of Ur, a colossal ziggurat took shape, its terraces built of thousands upon thousands of sun-baked bricks. With each new layer, the structure seemed to reach upward toward the heavens, a testament to the gods' favor and to human tenacity. Builders carved stairways up the stepped platforms, culminating in a sacred space that only the highest-ranked priests and priestesses could enter. When Ur-Nammu passed, his son Shulgi continued and even expanded upon his legacy. Shulgi's administrative and cultural zeal propelled Ur-3 to its zenith. He restructured provinces, appointing trusted governors and providing them with guidelines to manage resources. Under his watch, scribes compiled extensive records of daily transactions, from livestock to temple offerings, producing one of the most comprehensive bureaucratic systems in the ancient world. Where Akkadian overshadowing had once threatened to erase local identity, Shulgi's era reaffirmed Sumer's cultural heartbeat. In addition to his administrative flair, Shulgi presented himself as a cultivated monarch. He commissioned hymns celebrating not only the gods but his own lineage and feats, a strategy to cement his semi-divine status. Scribes praised him as a musician, athlete, and scholar, credits that bolstered the mystique of royal power. He also invested in long-distance trade, sending envoys to lands rich in copper and precious stones. Caravans laden with rare woods and metals flowed back into Sumer, invigorating workshops where artisans crafted jewelry and sacred objects. Within the cities, renewed prosperity ignited a creative surge. Sculptors chiseled lifelike statues of rulers and high officials, capturing each regal fold of a garment. Jewelers polished lapis lazuli and carnelian into vibrant inlays, adorning the interiors of temples and palaces. Cylinder seals regained their popularity, their intricate carvings reflecting religious scenes or proud references to royal achievements. Meanwhile, ziggurat complexes doubled as cultural centers, where scribes taught the Sumerian language alongside the widespread Akkadian tongue. The old culture blossomed, blended, and thrived anew. Festivals also reclaimed their splendor. Under the glow of oil lamps, processions honoring Nana, the moon god, and Inanna, the goddess of love and war, flooded Ur's streets with song and dance. Musicians, trained in temple schools, performed for throngs of devoted citizens. Priests and priestesses presented offerings in elaborate ceremonies, beseeching the deities for fertile lands and victory over any lingering enemies. For the first time in a generation, people exuded confidence that Sumer was not doomed to an endless cycle of invasions and decline. Despite the outward harmony, Ur-3 could not entirely escape challenges. Periodic tensions arose on its borders, and the memory of the Gutian devastation remained a cautionary tale. Maintaining the massive building projects and the standing army required careful resource management. Some peasants murmured at being summoned too often for corvée labor, or complained of taxes needed to finance new construction. Still, as opposed to the earlier empires where local identities felt crushed, Shulgi's governance allowed enough breathing space for each province to flourish in relative peace. Such peace fostered a regional exchange of ideas. Intermarriages between different city-states' ruling families were common, sealing alliances through marital ties. Priests wrote new theologies blending local and broader Mesopotamian deities, acknowledging that they were part of a larger cultural tapestry. Lesser city-states, which once fearfully sought safety behind tall walls, found themselves participating in vibrant trade networks under Ur's protective umbrella. Even beyond the Tigris and Euphrates, merchants described Ur as a glittering hub of commerce and learning. They spoke of monumental ziggurats, meticulously planned streets, and a populace confident in the laws that governed them. Mesopotamian scribes recorded their enchantment with the city's orderly docks, where ships laden with goods from the Persian Gulf arrived daily. For travelers who came from lands shattered by the Gutian turmoil, the calm and prosperity in Ur felt like a miracle. At its core, Ur-3 exemplified a reassertion of Sumerian identity. Though informed by Akkadian innovations in administration and occasionally challenged by Elam or other regional threats, it strove to recapture the brilliance that once made Sumer the envy of the ancient world. With roads secured and ziggurats shining in the desert light, the third dynasty of Ur reclaimed its ancestral legacy, reminding every onlooker, from the humblest farmer to the proudest temple priest. Chapter 13. The Shadows of Change, Environmental and External Pressures. Despite the flourishing spirit of the Ur-3 period, a subtle tension gnawed at the edges of Sumerian prosperity. Quietly at first, the land itself began to show signs of overuse. For centuries, farmers had relied on a network of canals to keep the fields verdant. Yet in this semi-arid climate, as water evaporated from irrigated soil, salt began to accumulate. Each harvest drew more nutrients from the earth, and only a fraction of that fertility returned. Over generations, once lush plots took on a whitish sheen, their productivity waning. Salinization, as the process came to be understood much later, was relentless. Scribes in some districts reported flagging yields in barley fields that once supplied entire city-states. Concerned administrators dispatched overseers to rotate crops more diligently, to flush the soil with river water whenever feasible. But repeated droughts and an unyielding sun often thwarted these measures. The same irrigation network that had birthed Sumer's first cities now threatened their survival if not carefully managed. Beyond the farmland, nomadic movements also intensified. Semitic tribes from the west, sometimes labeled by Sumerian texts as Amorites, scouted the vulnerable frontiers. They roamed with herds of sheep and goats, searching for greener pastures. While many tribes traded peacefully, others encroached on settled farmland or harried caravans. Sumerian rulers responded by fortifying border towns and erecting watchtowers. Yet this burden on local militias stretched the kingdom's resources, forcing the palace to juggle agricultural renewal with frontier defense. In the east, Elamites posed a persistent challenge. Although Sumer's renaissance had curtailed their ambitions for a time, Elamite rulers remained poised to strike whenever political fractures appeared. Periodic invasions or raids tested the unity that Ur's monarchs labored to maintain. Garrisoning troops in frontier regions became essential. As more resources funneled into the military, tensions emerged in city councils, where civic projects jostled for funding alongside urgent defensive measures. Corvée labor, compulsory work for public endeavors, became a lightning rod of resentment. Reconstruction of canals and ramparts demanded a steady flow of laborers. Farmers, weary from year-round toil and already pressed by taxes, found themselves summoned to hauling bricks or dredging waterways. The palace kept meticulous records, ensuring each district provided its quota of workers. Though such organizations stabilized the realm in the short term, it also bred a sense of fatigue among the lower classes, who bore the heaviest burdens of Sumer's grand upkeep. As these strains mounted, the once seamless unity of Ur-3 began showing cracks. Provincial governors loyal in theory to the king discovered that they could barter autonomy by threatening to withhold taxes or laborers. Some grew protective of local resources, forging clandestine pacts with wandering tribes for mutual defense or trade. Such arrangements, while pragmatic for governors, undermined the centralized structure that leaders like Shulgi had prized. Rumors of nepotism and cronyism, whereby influential families shared administrative power among themselves, further fueled cynicism among common folk. Still, cultural life retained an undercurrent of confidence. Scribes composed hymns celebrating the gods' continued favor. Artisans developed new forms of ornamental inlay, mixing shell and precious stones in elaborate patterns. Poets in court circles penned verses glorifying the monarchy, as if speaking these praises might ward off the creeping gloom. Temples remained focal points of civic pride, and during festivals, entire communities gathered to recall the glories of Sumer's past, ensuring hope did not extinguish. But no ritual could fully dispel the reality of diminishing harvests and rising threats. Increased salinity in the soil forced more farmers to switch to salt-tolerant barley varieties, while wheat cultivation became scarce. Even then, yields slid year by year, placing upward pressure on grain prices. City dwellers, who relied on market purchases, struggled to afford staples. As frustration mounted, local discontent threatened to flare into open rebellion whenever the monarchy stumbled. In time, the environment itself began to erode faith in everlasting prosperity. Periodic flooding from the Euphrates or Tigris, once harnessed for irrigation, turned destructive if dikes were not constantly repaired. The fragile interplay between water management and farmland reclamation demanded unwavering vigilance. With tensions drawing resources toward military defenses, upkeep lagged behind the merciless demands of nature. Scribes' records from later phases of Ur-3 note canals silting up or collapsing under neglect. Despite all these challenges, Sumerians remained a resilient people. Their civilization had weathered invasions, collapses, and renaissances before. Within many households burned a quiet determination to preserve ancestral traditions, cuneiform writing, temple rituals, and the abiding sense that they occupied the fertile land granted by the gods. Yet for every act of resolve, external and environmental pressures loomed larger. What had begun as a sunlit renaissance gradually drifted beneath the lengthening shadows of hardship, leaving Sumer poised at a crossroads where fate and human effort would clash yet again. Chapter 14, Final Disintegration and the End of an Era. The cracks in Sumer's mighty foundation deepened as the challenges of salinized soil, shifting tribes, and strained governance converged. Even the largest Sumerian cities, once impregnable symbols of stability, found themselves vulnerable. The monumental ziggurats still pierced the sky, but their mud-brick facades needed constant upkeep in a land increasingly strapped for resources. Caravan traffic waned under the weight of steep tolls and frequent raids, reducing the influx of exotic goods that once fueled cultural splendor. Where once kings enforced broad unity, rivalries between local governors and rebellious enclaves intensified. In the midst of eroding farmland, provincial leaders needed to secure enough grain for their own subjects, especially their own armies, rather than dispatch supplies to the capital. The king's edicts carried less weight among those who believed survival hinged on local alliances. Isolated cities entrenched themselves behind tall walls, rarely offering mutual aid. The tight lattice of Sumerian interdependence frayed, threatening to unravel entirely. This climate of uncertainty drew opportunistic forces to the region's doorstep. The Amorites, who for generations had grazed herds at Sumer's fringes, now tested the defenses of outlying settlements. Small-scale skirmishes evolved into larger clashes. Some communities, too exhausted from canal maintenance and internal disputes, surrendered without a major fight. Elamite forces from the east also resumed their push into Mesopotamia, sensing Sumer's faltering unity. City after city struggled to muster the coordinated resistance once marshaled under strong kings. In Ur, the last remnants of the royal dynasty fought to preserve their authority. They levied new taxes to fund mercenaries, but that only deepened local resentment. Palatial archives still preserved a memory of grand undertakings. Temple expansions, lavish festivals, law codes once esteemed as bulwarks of civilization. Yet these proud traditions meant little to peasants facing hunger or governors under foreign siege. No chorus of scribes could still the restless tide overtaking Sumer. Meanwhile, environmental conditions offered no reprieve. Certain canals now ran brackish, clogged with salt that corroded the soil. Fields incapable of producing reliable harvests forced entire villages to uproot themselves, migrating in search of better land. As rural populations thinned, city dwellers lost a vital base of agricultural support. Grain prices rose steeply, fueling black market dealings and deepening class divisions. Even in times of relative peace, the scarcity of produce kindled social unrest. The monarchy's response varied. Some kings attempted patchwork alliances, others sought temporary truces. Envoys crossed deserts and mountains to petition for foreign assistance, sometimes promising tribute in exchange for military aid. But Sumer no longer held the allure it once did. Weakened commerce and fractious leadership signaled to neighboring states that this was a land in decline rather than a prized partner. Promised rescue often failed to materialize or came too late to turn the tide. Within the cities, the heartbreak of watching once proud temples fall into disrepair weighed heavily on older generations. Many had lived through the optimistic surge of Ur-3, its laws, restored ziggurats, and robust trade networks. Now they witnessed the shuttering of scribal schools due to funding shortfalls, the quiet exodus of artisans who could no longer find local patrons, and the crumbling ramparts that no squadron of overworked laborers could properly mend. Those scribes who remained busied themselves documenting the unraveling. Tablets recount desperate measures. Frantic calls to gather volunteers for city militias, the distribution of temple grain to stave off famine, and hastily negotiated ceasefires with wandering tribes. In a cruel twist, the meticulous record-keeping so vital to Sumer's identity also served as a written chronicle of its downfall. Each day's dire events were etched into clay, destined to be discovered millennia later as poignant testaments to a civilization on the brink. Ultimately, no single disastrous battle brought about Sumer's end. Rather, it was a slow and grinding collapse, a patchwork of surrenders and desertions under constant pressures. By around 2000 BC, regions that once identified with the Grand Sumerian lineage were overrun or absorbed by emerging powers. Amorite chieftains established their own city-states in former Sumerian strongholds. Elamite incursions carved out territories that paid tribute to distant rulers. The last Sumerian kingship flickered out in Ur, its ziggurat overshadowed by the final wave of foreign dominion. Yet even as Sumer fell from political power, its cultural legacy endured. The cuneiform script, shaped by centuries of scribal dedication, continued under new dynasties that rose in Mesopotamia, Babylonian, Assyrian, and beyond. Sumerian myths, too, survived in translations, fueling epics that shaped the literary heritage of the ancient Near East. Future law codes would echo the justice ideals championed by Ur-Nammu and others. Embers of Sumer's spirit glowed in every corner of the region, reminding later civilizations of the land's groundbreaking innovations in writing, architecture, and governance. In the hush that followed this drawn-out collapse, what remained was a scattering of broken walls and battered ziggurats, a silent tribute to humanity's first grand experiment in city building and social organization. Though Sumer's political influence faded, the fragments of its soul lingered in the new societies taking shape across Mesopotamia. And so the end of one epoch became the bedrock for the future, leaving behind stories and artifacts that would both haunt and inspire successive generations. A poignant reminder of the fragile line all civilizations walk between splendor and oblivion. Chapter 15. The Living Legacy of Sumer. Long after the last Sumerian king laid down his scepter, echoes of this ancient civilization continued to ripple across Mesopotamia and beyond. Though the city-states of Sumer no longer stood as political giants, their cultural achievements became the cornerstone upon which later empires built. Cuneiform, born of simple tokens pressed into clay, remained the region's dominant writing system for centuries, transcending the fall of dynasties and the rise of new powers. Even the successors who supplanted Sumer's authority adopted its administrative methods. Babylonians, Assyrians, and others refined the Sumerian approach to taxation, record-keeping, and temple governance, acknowledging that a well-run state depended on the organizational genius first pioneered in the southern plains. Every clay tablet they inscribed stood as a silent tribute to a script invented hundreds of years before, in bustling temple courtyards where scribes first carved out wedge-shaped symbols. Religious concepts, too, wove themselves into the fabric of subsequent cultures. Later generations still invoked Enlil, Inanna, and Enki under adapted names, folding Sumerian deities into new pantheons or linking them with their own gods. Rituals reminiscent of those once performed atop Sumerian ziggurats appeared in far-flung cities, confirming that beliefs could migrate alongside trade, conquest, or tribute. As myths traveled, they collected local flavors, yet Sumer's underlying cosmologies proved durable. Their language, linguistically distinct from the Semitic tongues that would later dominate Mesopotamia, continued to be taught in scribal schools long after Sumer's political eclipse. In many temples, Sumerian persisted as a scholarly or liturgical language, used to copy ancient hymns and prayers. Students painstakingly transcribed old texts, preserving a literary tradition that linked them to a distant golden age when Sumerian kings reigned supreme. Although few spoke Sumerian conversationally anymore, its written form retained an almost sacred prestige. City design across Mesopotamia also bore the stamp of Sumerian innovation. The concept of a protective wall encircling a central ziggurat and palace remained a template for urban planning. Irrigation methods, canals, levees, gated sluices, were adapted and sometimes improved upon, but the core principles stemmed from the earliest solutions devised in Uruk and Lagash. Even as conquerors altered cityscapes to glorify new regimes, the essential blueprint always harked back to that first age of organized life between the rivers. The Epic of Gilgamesh, in particular, exemplified Sumer's narrative gift to posterity. Already centuries old by the time Sumer fell, The story was copied and modified by Akkadians, Babylonians, and other literate societies. Kings from later dynasties read about Gilgamesh's heroic quest for meaning and immortality, seeing reflections of their own desires. Generation by generation, the epic transformed, yet its heart, a meditation on friendship, loss, and the limits of mortal power, remained quintessentially Sumerian. Archaeological rediscovery in modern times finally lifted Sumer from the footnotes of forgotten lore. Excavations at sites like Ur and Uruk unearthed cylinder seals, intricate gold artifacts, and entire libraries of clay tablets that revealed a civilization far more advanced than many had imagined for such early dates. Their laws, social organization, and artistic expressions challenged assumptions about the primitive past, showing instead a society deeply attuned to governance, ethics, and cosmological wonder. In broader historical memory, Sumer's story stands as a testament to humanity's potential and its vulnerabilities. Having birthed the first known cities, they also encountered the universal pitfalls of environmental strain and external aggression. Their triumphs in building monumental architecture and codifying social justice did not guarantee eternal survival. Yet in their fall, they imparted crucial lessons. That no civilization, however innovative, is immune to resource depletion or shifting geopolitical winds. Sumer's greatest gift may be how it continues to spark awe and curiosity, millennia after its decline. Historians, linguists, and storytellers keep returning to these sandy ruins for inspiration and insight into the human condition. The cuneiform script, once on the brink of being lost to time, has been deciphered, illuminating daily life in an era older than many biblical tales. The memory of Ur's ziggurat, Uruk's grand walls, and Lagash's social reforms compels us to see patterns in our own age. How prosperity, conflict, resilience, and creativity are perennial threads in the tapestry of civilization. And so, Sumer did not vanish into oblivion after all. Instead, it lives on through each invention borrowed, each myth retold, each sun-baked tablet deciphered. The world's earliest known civilization carved a path for every subsequent urban experiment, reminding us that the seeds of modern society were first planted when a handful of villages by the Tigris and Euphrates decided to work together, scrawl symbols into clay, and revere a pantheon whose legacy would span epochs. The imprint they left, on words, on worship, on city building, continues to resonate, ensuring Sumer's spirit endures at the very core of human history. In the silent plains of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates once swelled with promise, scattered tells. Mounds rising from the desert bear quiet witness to Sumer's grandeur and collapse. Shards of pottery, fragments of clay tablets, and traces of ziggurat foundations all whisper of a time when humanity first reshaped the land to seed urban life. Through ceaseless curiosity and fragile unity, these early pioneers carved a path that countless empires would follow. Their story is one of continual invention. From harnessing irrigation to forging the earliest known writing system, from establishing city-states endowed with temples that soared toward heaven to shaping rituals that stitched spiritual beliefs into civic identity. At every step, Sumerians transcended the boundaries of what was thought possible, pushing the frontier of collective organization and cultural expression. Yet their tale also underscores the delicate line between innovation and overreach. Salt-encrusted soil, roving enemies, and internal rivalries brought Sumer low even after its many renaissances. This cycle of flourishing and downfall reminds us that strength alone cannot guarantee endurance. The equilibrium between a people's ambitions and the land's capacities demands perpetual vigilance and adaptation. In time, Sumer's echoes found new homes in Babylon, Assyria, and across the lands touching the Persian Gulf. Conquerors borrowed Sumer's methods as they built fresh kingdoms on the same venerable plains. Scribal schools kept the Sumerian language alive for centuries, preserving the songs and laws that once defined the oldest civilization. The region's undulating fortunes would perpetually return to the foundational idea that harnessed resources, balanced faith with governance, and captured hopes in wedge-shaped marks of clay. As we unearth statues of calm-faced priests or read the chipped cuneiform lines recording debts paid in barley, we are reminded that every aspect of modern civilization, its cities, markets, bureaucracies, and stories, owes a debt to these first city builders. Whether viewed as heroic founders or tragic forerunners, the Sumerians lit the torch of urban life and passed it forward. In that passing lies the heartbeat of history itself, carried onward by each new generation who dare imagine a flourishing world built from the dust of yesteryear.